She did not speak for 11 days. Not to the counselors who came on Tuesdays and Thursdays with their soft voices and their careful questions. Not to her grandmother, who drove 4 hours from Sudbury and sat beside her bed every morning, reading aloud from a book of poetry Zara had loved as a small child. Not to the school principal who called the house twice a week and left messages that began with, "We just want you to know we're here." Not to anyone. Mireille Okonkwo had built a company from a shared workspace in Scarborough with 2 laptops, 1 maxed-out credit card, and a clarity of purpose that people who had known her in those early years still talked about decades later. She had taken Vertex Systems from nothing to a publicly traded technology firm with offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. She had been named to boards. She had given the convocation address at 3 universities. She had, by every external measure, become someone who knew how to handle difficult things. But she did not know how to handle this. Her daughter Zara was 14 years old and had not spoken in 11 days, and Mireille sat in the kitchen of their home in Forest Hill at 5:30 in the morning, with a cup of coffee going cold beside her and no idea what to do next. Zara's father, Mireille's ex-husband David, had died in September. Sudden cardiac arrest on a Tuesday afternoon. He had been at the gym. He was 43 years old. They had been divorced for 6 years, but they had raised Zara together, in the way that people who genuinely love their child but cannot love each other anymore sometimes manage to do. With shared calendars and clear agreements and a generosity toward each other that surprised even them. David had been a good father. He had been at every school play. He had known all of Zara's friends by name. He had called Mireille the morning of his death to ask whether Zara had mentioned anything about a science project, because he wanted to pick up supplies on his way to get her. He never made it to the school. Zara had been waiting at the pickup point for 45 minutes when Mireille arrived to find her sitting on the steps with her backpack between her feet, looking at a point somewhere past the fence line. She had not said anything when Mireille sat down beside her. She had not said anything in the car. She had not said anything for 11 days. The psychiatrist used words like acute grief response and selective mutism secondary to trauma and recommended a structured therapeutic environment and patience. Mireille understood all of these words individually. Together they told her very little about how to go upstairs and knock on her daughter's door. The grief counselors were kind. The teachers sent cards. Mireille's colleagues covered her schedule without being asked and did not mention it. Her own mother flew in from Lagos for 2 weeks and cooked enormous quantities of jollof and sat in the kitchen and talked to Mireille about grief the way her generation talked about it, directly, without softening it, which Mireille found unexpectedly helpful. But her mother had to go home. The counselors came and went, and Zara still did not speak. It was Mireille's business partner, Theo Achimpong, who suggested Rosalind. He mentioned it the way he mentioned most things, quietly, at the end of a conversation about something else, as if he had been turning it over for a while and had decided only at the last moment to say it out loud. They were on the phone, going over Q3 projections. He said, after a pause, that a woman had helped his nephew after the accident 3 years ago. Not a therapist, though she had trained as one. More like, he searched for the word, a companion. Someone who understood grief in a way that was specific to young people who had lost a parent. He said he would text the number if Mireille wanted it. Mireille said she would think about it. She called the number the next morning. The woman who answered had a voice that was unhurried in a way that made Mireille immediately want to slow down. Her name was Rosalind Ferreira. She asked Mireille to tell her about Zara, and Mireille talked for 20 minutes, and Rosalind did not interrupt once. When Mireille finished, Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Then she asked 2 questions. The first was, what did Zara love before this happened? The second was, not what does Zara need, what does Zara miss? No one had asked Mireille that second question before. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she said, her dad used to take her to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. Just the 2 of them. They went every week from May to October. David would let her pick whatever she wanted for breakfast, and they would eat it on a bench by the fountain. Zara had been talking all summer about a honey vendor she had discovered, who kept bees on a rooftop in Kensington Market. She had wanted to visit the hives. Rosalind was quiet again for a moment. Then she said she thought she could help. She arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in November. She drove a 10-year-old Civic with a cracked side mirror, and she carried a canvas tote bag that appeared to contain, among other things, a thermos and a library book with a broken spine. She was perhaps 40, with close-cropped natural hair, and the kind of calm that did not feel performed. She shook Mireille's hand and thanked her for having her, and then she asked where Zara's room was, and she went upstairs alone. Mireille stood in the front hallway for a moment after she heard the knock on Zara's door. Then she went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and did not move for a very long time. Nothing happened that day. Rosalind spent 2 hours upstairs and came back down and sat with Mireille over tea, and said that Zara had let her in, which was something. She said Zara had not spoken, but had not asked her to leave either. She had sat at her desk, and Rosalind had sat on the floor near the window, and they had just occupied the same space for a while. She said sometimes that was enough to start with. Mireille asked if it had worked. Rosalind said it was too early to use that word. She came back Thursday and Friday. She came the following Monday and Tuesday. She did not seem to follow any particular protocol. Some days she brought things: a seed catalog she left on the desk, a small potted plant she set on the window sill without comment. Some days she brought nothing and simply sat. Mireille learned to stop watching the stairs. On the 9th day, Mireille was in her home office on a call when she heard, from somewhere above her, the sound of her daughter's voice. She could not make a words. It was brief. A sentence. Maybe two. Then silence again. Mireille's hands stopped moving on the keyboard. She stayed very still until the call ended. Then she sat there for a while. She did not ask Rosalind what Zara had said. She was not sure she was supposed to, and Rosalind did not volunteer it, which Mireille found she respected. What changed was not sudden. It was the way water finds its way through. Not a flood, but a steady seep through small openings. Zara started coming downstairs for dinner. She did not talk much, but she sat at the table and ate, and occasionally she would say something brief. A comment about a show she was watching, a question about when the car was going in for its winter tires. Small things, the kind of things that meant she was still there. Rosalind continued to come. By the 3rd week, she and Zara were sometimes downstairs together, in the kitchen or the living room. Mireille would come home to find them at the table with the seed catalog open between them, or Rosalind reading on the couch while Zara drew in the sketchbook she had not touched since September. One evening, Mireille came downstairs at 9 o'clock to find the kitchen light on, and both of them at the counter, making something that appeared to involve a great deal of flour. Zara looked up when she heard Mireille's step and said, without preamble, "Rosalind is teaching me to make scones." Dad used to like scones. It was the first time Zara had said his name out loud since he died. Mireille said, "He did. He really did." She sat down at the kitchen island and watched them for a while without speaking. The light was warm, and the kitchen smelled of butter and vanilla, and outside the November darkness pressed against the windows, and none of that mattered at all. What she thought, watching her daughter carefully measure out flour, with Rosalind steady and patient beside her, was that she had been trying to fix the wrong thing. She had been trying to bring Zara back to a version of herself that existed before September. She had been trying to restore what was lost, and Rosalind had not done that. Rosalind had simply stayed, had sat in the room and not required anything, had made space for grief to be what it needed to be without rushing it toward resolution. She understood, sitting there, that she had not been doing that. She had been managing. She was very good at managing. It was, in many ways, her greatest professional strength and her most significant personal failure. She did not say any of this to Rosalind that evening, but she sat with it for several days after. There was a man she had been avoiding thinking about. His name was Patrick Halsey. He was a civil engineer with the city of Toronto, and he had been introduced to her at a fundraising dinner 8 months ago by a mutual colleague who had described him with the particular enthusiasm people use when they are trying to set someone up but are too polite to say so directly. He was tall and had a dry sense of humor, and he had spent most of the dinner talking to Mireille about a pedestrian bridge project he was working on in the East End, which she had found unexpectedly interesting. They had exchanged numbers. He had texted twice. She had been meaning to reply. David's death had not changed her feelings about Patrick, exactly. But it had clarified something. Zara had adored her father, and he was gone, and the house was full of that absence, and introducing someone new into Zara's world felt she did not have a good word for it. Premature, presumptuous, like something she did not have the right to do. She did not know that Zara already knew about Patrick. Zara had found the text 3 weeks ago when Marie had left her phone on the counter and gone upstairs for a moment. She had not been looking for anything. She had only glanced because the screen lit up with a message from a contact saved simply as PH. The text said, "No pressure at all. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. Hope Zara is doing a bit better." She had put the phone back where she found it and had not mentioned it. She mentioned it to Rosalind. Rosalind had asked, after a moment, "How did that make you feel?" Zara had thought about it for a while. She said she didn't know. She said she thought maybe she was supposed to feel weird about it. But mostly she had felt, she searched for the word, relieved. Because it meant her mom wasn't alone either. She said her dad used to say that her mom worked too hard at being okay. She said she thought that was probably still true. Rosalind had listened to all of this without interrupting. She had not told Mireille any of it, because it was not hers to tell. December came and brought with it the particular difficulty of the first season of firsts. The first Advent, the first of David's daughter's recital that he would miss, the first time they put up the Christmas tree without him there to untangle the lights while complaining amiably about the lights. Zara cried. For the first time on the evening they decorated the tree, not a breakdown, just quiet, steady tears while she hung the ornaments. Mireille sat on the floor beside her and held her and did not say anything about it being okay. She just held on. She had learned that from Rosalind, or rather she had watched Rosalind do it and understood, finally, that it was what she herself needed to learn to do. Rosalind was there for the tree decorating. She had been invited, which had surprised Mireille a little. It was Zara who had asked, simply, "Can Rosalind come?" She sat in the armchair near the window with her tea, and handed ornaments over, when asked, and listened to Zara. Talk about the year the cat had knocked the whole tree over, and the year David had bought the wrong size lights, and had insisted for 3 years that they were actually better lights. He had specifically chosen these lights, before finally admitting they were not better. Mireille had laughed at that story. A real laugh, the kind that surprised her. The week before Christmas, Mireille was working late when she heard the door to Zara's room open and footsteps come down the stairs. She expected them to turn toward the kitchen. Instead, they came to the door of her office. Zara knocked and looked in and said, "Are you going to text that person back?" Mireille looked up. She said, "What person?" Zara gave her the look that 14-year-olds give when they feel the question is beneath them. She said, "PH the engineer. Theo told me he was nice. He told Dad he was nice." She paused. "I asked Grandma about him." Mireille was quiet for a moment. She said, "That was quite a lot of research." Zara leaned against the doorframe. She looked in that moment so much like her father that Mireille had to look at the desk for a second. She said, "Dad always said you waited too long on things. He said it was your biggest thing." She said it without heat, the way she might have stated a fact about the weather. Mireille said he wasn't wrong. Zara said, "Okay." And then, "I'm getting a snack. Do you want anything?" She was already turning toward the kitchen when Mireille said her name. Zara stopped. Mireille said, "Thank you." Just that. Not for the permission, which it wasn't, or the information, which it was partly. For something she did not have words for. Zara said, "Yeah," and went to get her snack. Mireille sat in the quiet of her office for a while after that. Then she picked up her phone. she found the contact. She read through the exchange, which was brief and quiet, and showed a person who was not demanding anything, who was simply keeping a line open. The last text was from 4 months ago. Peak, no pressure at all. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. Hope Zara is doing a bit better. She wrote back. She said, "She is, thank you. I'm sorry for the silence." She thought for a moment. Then she added, "I'd like to get coffee if you're still open to it." She put the phone down. She did not pick it up again for the rest of the night. He replied the next morning. He said he was absolutely still open to it. He asked if she knew the place on the Danforth with the really excellent oat milk lattes, because he had a recommendation if she did not. She did not know it. She told him she didn't. He said he would show her. That Saturday, Mireille got up early and went upstairs and knocked on Zara's door. Zara said, "Come in," and Mireille sat on the edge of the bed, and they talked for a while. About David, about the holidays, about a trip Zara had mentioned wanting to take in the spring to the East Coast, about the honey vendor at Kensington Market, and how maybe in May they could go together. And Zara could show her the rooftop hives her father had never gotten around to seeing. Zara said that sounded good. She said it the way she said most things now, briefly, a little sideways, in the manner of a person who was still finding their way back to language. But she said it. Mireille reached over and tucked a piece of her daughter's hair back, and Zara did not pull away, which she had been doing for months, which she had every right to do, which had been a small grief all its own. Rosalind came that afternoon. She and Zara disappeared upstairs, and Mireille could hear, intermittently, the sound of conversation. Sometimes quiet, sometimes Zara laughing at something, the specific laugh she had when she didn't mean to laugh but couldn't help it. Mireille stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, which was covered in snow and looked like it was waiting for something. She thought about David. She did this the way she was learning to do it, without bracing, without managing the thought before it arrived. She let it come. He had been a good man and a good father, and she had loved him in the way you love someone you built something with, which is a specific and permanent kind of love that does not end with the marriage. She missed him for herself, and she missed him enormously for Zara, and she understood now that these were two different griefs, and both of them were true. She did not think the grief would go away. She had stopped expecting it to. She thought about Patrick Halsey and the coffee on the Danforth, and she did not feel guilty about thinking about it. She felt something closer to cautious, careful, the way you are with something new that you don't want to handle roughly. Late in the afternoon, she heard the door to Zara's room open, and the footsteps come down the stairs. And this time they continued all the way to the kitchen, and Rosalind appeared in the doorway with her canvas tote and her thermos, and said she was heading out. Mireille thanked her. Rosalind said Zara had something she wanted to say, and she would let her say it herself. She left. Mireille stood in the kitchen. A minute later, Zara appeared. She was wearing the oversized hoodie she had taken from David's closet the week he died and had not taken off since, which the grief counselor had flagged, and Mireille had quietly decided to leave alone. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She said, "Rosalind says grief doesn't have a timeline." Mireille said. "That's true," Zara said. "She says it just changes shape." Mireille said, "I think that's right." Zara was quiet for a moment. She looked at the floor, then she looked up and said, "I think I want to go to the market in spring, the one Dad used to take me to. I want to go with you." She paused. "Maybe your engineer can come." Mireille looked at her daughter. She had her father's eyes and her grandmother's posture, and she was 14 years old, and had been through something that no one should have to go through at 14, and she was still standing there, still talking, still finding the words. Mireille said, "I think that's a very good idea." She opened her arms, and Zara crossed the kitchen and let herself be held, properly, for the first time in months. She was almost as tall as Mireille now. She smelled like the lavender shampoo she had been using since she was small. Outside, the snow had started again, soft and steady against the windows. They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, the two of them. The garden was buried under snow, but it was still there, waiting. The market would not open until May. Spring was a long way off. It would come.